2005, Tennessee Nora Jackson.
Nora Jackson's release this morning ends a more than decade-long legal saga, which included a second-degree murder conviction.
In the quiet suburbs of Memphis, Tennessee, the morning of June 5th, 2005, began like any other. The Jackson home sat on a peaceful street, a well-kept brick house belonging to a respected family. But inside, the scene was something straight out of a nightmare. Jennifer Jackson, a 39-year-old investment banker and single mother, was found brutally stabbed more than 50 times in her bedroom. Her only daughter, 18-year-old Nora Jackson, would soon become the center of one of Tennessee's most controversial murder cases of the decade. Jennifer was known in her community as intelligent, independent, and fiercely dedicated to her daughter. She had raised Nora alone after the tragic death of Nora's father, James Jackson, who had been murdered during a robbery just 2 years earlier. That unsolved trauma hung over the family, a haunting backdrop to what would come next. In the early hours of June 5th, neighbors heard screaming, but no one realized what was happening. Later that morning, Nora called a friend in a panic, saying her mother wasn't answering the phone and that she needed help. Together, they entered the Jackson home. What they found would scar them for life. Blood everywhere, drawers pulled open, a sign of struggle, and Jennifer's body lying on the floor beside her bed. The autopsy later revealed more than 50 stab wounds, a level of violence that spoke not of robbery, but of rage. Investigators arrived quickly, but as they examined the crime scene, questions began to pile up faster than answers. There was no forced entry. Nothing valuable was missing. The only thing out of place was Nora's story. At first, detectives treated Nora as a traumatized daughter, but inconsistencies soon surfaced. She told police she'd been out all night, first at a party, then with friends. Around the time and of the later murder, driving around, her calls aimlessly. dropped off completely. Yet, and there was a 2-hour gap in her timeline timeline she couldn't explain. Friends described Nora as rebellious but not violent. She had recently graduated high school and was known for throwing parties while her mother was away. Tension between mother and daughter had grown in the months before Jennifer's death. Arguments about Nora's friends, her behavior, and money. It was a typical mother-teen relationship, except this one was about to explode. The prosecution later argued that the murder happened after an argument about Nora's late-night lifestyle. They believed Jennifer had confronted her daughter, and Nora snapped, stabbing her mother repeatedly in a fit of rage. But the case wasn't that simple. There were no eyewitnesses, no fingerprints on the knife, and no direct physical evidence linking Nora to the murder. The state's case leaned heavily on circumstantial details, her behavior after the crime, her inconsistent statements, and her failure to cooperate fully with police. Detectives noted that Nora refused to give a DNA sample at first, and that she avoided interviews. To prosecutors, this was the behavior of someone hiding guilt. To her defense team, it was the reaction of a terrified teenager who had just lost her mother and was being cornered. Still, the evidence, or what the jury believed to be evidence, built a powerful narrative. Prosecutors portrayed Nora as a spoiled, impulsive girl whose relationship with her mother had turned toxic. They pointed to her drug use, rebellious attitude, and erratic behavior. One witness testified that Nora had told her in frustration, "I just wish my mom would go away." In the courtroom, that line became the spark that lit a fire under the prosecution's theory. The defense fought back, arguing that the investigation was deeply flawed. The crime scene had been contaminated. Police had focused on Noura almost immediately, ignoring other leads. There were unidentified DNA samples found in the house, and, most notably, the defense argued that key evidence was withheld, a fact that would later play a crucial role in her appeal. In 2009, after years of legal battles and public speculation, Noura Jackson was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. She was just 22 years old. The verdict divided the community. Some saw justice for Jennifer. Others saw a broken system punishing a young woman without proof beyond reasonable doubt. Behind bars, Noura maintained her innocence. She spent her years in prison, studying, writing letters, and trying to rebuild what little was left of her life. Her supporters, including several legal advocacy groups, argued that her conviction rested on weak evidence and prosecutorial misconduct. They were right to suspect something was wrong. In 2014, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned Noura's conviction. The court ruled that the prosecution had violated her constitutional rights by withholding evidence that could have supported her defense, including statements suggesting another person might have been involved. After nearly a decade in prison, Noura Jackson was released in 2015. Later, she entered a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter, which allowed her to avoid a retrial and regain her freedom. But freedom came with a heavy shadow. The public's opinion remained divided. Some still believed she was guilty. Others believed she was a victim of trauma, flawed investigation, and a justice system hungry for closure. The question that haunted Memphis remained unanswered. Did Noura Jackson really kill her mother? Or was she the scapegoat in a tragedy too complex for a simple explanation? Psychologists analyzing the case saw layers of emotion beneath the crime. 2014, Bali, USA, Heather Mack. In August 2014, the shimmering beaches of Bali were bustling with tourists seeking paradise. But behind the luxury hotels and palm-lined streets, a horrific story was about to unfold. One that would shock 2 nations and become one of the most infamous true crime cases of the decade. Heather Mack was 18 years old, a Chicago heiress with a complicated past. Her mother, Sheila Von Vies Mack, was 62, a wealthy, well-connected socialite who had devoted her life to her daughter after the death of Heather's father, the famed jazz composer, James Mack. To outsiders, they looked like an elegant pair, a cultured mother and her rebellious but privileged daughter. But underneath the tropical sun, years of resentment, grief, and defiance were about to erupt in violence. On August 12, 2014, Sheila and Heather checked into the luxurious St. Regis Resort in Bali. It was supposed to be a mother-daughter getaway, a chance to mend their fractured relationship. But the tension between them followed like a shadow. Hotel staff later testified that the two argued constantly over money, over control, over Heather's boyfriend, 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer, who had secretly joined them on the trip. Sheila disapproved of Tommy from the beginning. He was a struggling rapper from Chicago, living a life far removed from the refined world of Heather's upbringing. Their relationship had already caused turmoil back home. Heather accused her mother of being controlling, while Sheila feared her daughter was spiraling. The trip, she hoped, would be a fresh start. Instead, it became her final destination. On the evening of August 12, surveillance footage captured Tommy Schaefer arriving at the hotel, sneaking into Heather's suite under the cover of darkness. Hours later, at around 8 a.m. the next morning, Sheila Von Vies Mack was dead bludgeoned to death inside that same suite. The cause? severe blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted with the handle of a fruit bowl. The details that followed stunned even seasoned investigators. Heather and Tommy stuffed Sheila's body into a large silver suitcase, blood seeping through the fabric. They dragged it into a taxi, claiming it contained clothes. The driver, unaware of the gruesome cargo, drove them to a nearby hotel. But when the couple fled and left the suitcase behind, the driver grew suspicious. He called security. When the bag was opened, officers found the body folded, bruised, and lifeless. Within hours, Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer were arrested at another hotel, attempting to flee. Their faces were calm, almost detached. The story spread like wildfire. The suitcase killers of Bali. What could drive an 18-year-old girl to kill her own mother? Investigators soon unraveled the dark psychology behind the act. Heather's relationship with her mother had long been toxic. Police back in the United States confirmed multiple domestic disturbance calls to the Mack home, many involving fights between mother and daughter. Friends described Heather as volatile, entitled, yet deeply wounded. After her father's death in 2006, she had inherited millions, but the money was tied up in a trust controlled by her mother. Heather reportedly felt trapped, convinced Sheila was withholding what was rightfully hers. During interrogation, Heather claimed her mother had attacked her in a fit of rage, and that Tommy killed Sheila in self-defense. But evidence told a colder story. Text messages between the lovers painted a picture of premeditation. The day before the murder, Tommy had texted Heather, "We have to end this problem." She responded, "I love you. Just do it." The Indonesian justice system moved swiftly. The trial was a media circus. American tabloids framed it as the Bali suitcase murder, while locals watched with a mix of fascination and disgust. Heather appeared in court in colorful dresses, often smiling for the cameras. Tommy, quiet and expressionless, seemed resigned. Prosecutors accused the pair of planning the murder to gain access to Sheila's $1.5 million estate. Heather was pregnant at the time, a detail that both complicated and humanized the case. She gave birth to a baby girl while in custody, whom she named Stella. That image of a teenage mother behind bars, cradling her newborn while awaiting trial for killing her own mother, became the haunting symbol of the entire tragedy. In April 2015, the Denpasar District Court delivered its verdict. Tommy Schaefer was convicted of murder and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Heather Mack was found guilty of aiding the crime and received a 10-year sentence. The couple embraced as the verdict was read, as if accepting their shared destiny. But the story didn't end there. Heather served her sentence in Bali's notorious Karabokan prison, a sprawling complex infamous for overcrowding and harsh conditions. Inside, she became a minor celebrity. She gave interviews, posed for photos, and even posted to social media through smuggled phones. To some, she was a manipulative killer. To others, a confused girl caught in a storm of privilege, grief, and rebellion. Psychologists later dissected her motives. Many saw the murder as an extreme expression of unresolved trauma. Heather had grown up in luxury but without emotional stability. Her father's death fractured her sense of security. Her mother's attempts to control her life, though rooted in concern, fed Heather's resentment. Tommy, charismatic and rebellious, became her escape, a symbol of independence. Together, they created a delusional world where killing seemed like liberation. After serving 7 years, Heather Mack was released early in 2021 for good behavior, a decision that ignited outrage. Indonesian law allowed her early release, but her return to the United States opened a new legal chapter. Upon landing in Chicago, she was arrested by the FBI and charged with conspiracy to kill her mother as an American citizen committing murder abroad. Prosecutors argued that she had plotted the crime on U.S. soil, making her eligible for prosecution under American law. In 2023, Heather pleaded guilty to conspiracy to kill her mother, admitting that the murder was planned in advance. She was sentenced to 26 years in a U.S. federal prison. Kenesha Whitehead and Tasmiyah Janisha Whitehead. On a cold January morning in 2010, the quiet town of Conyers, Georgia was shaken by a crime so disturbing it seemed ripped from a psychological thriller. Inside a modest two-story home, 34-year-old Jarmeka Yvonne Nikki Whitehead, a vibrant mother known for her beauty and drive, was found dead in her bathroom, brutally stabbed more than 80 times. Her twin daughters, Tasmiyah and Jasmiyah Whitehead, both just 16 years old, stood outside as police arrived, crying and clinging to each other. But behind those tears lay a secret darker than anyone could imagine. The killers were standing right there. Nikki Whitehead was the picture of resilience. She had given birth to her twin girls at just 18 and spent years fighting to create a stable life for them. She worked as a hairstylist and mentor, and while life had been far from easy, she loved her daughters fiercely. But love in this home was entangled with volatility. Neighbors recalled hearing shouting matches. Teachers and social workers knew of the conflict between the girls and their mother, fights that sometimes turned physical. Nikki wanted discipline and structure. The twins wanted freedom. It was a battle of wills, and in the end, it turned fatal. The tension had reached a breaking point by late 2009. For years, the girls had lived mostly with their great-grandmother, Della Frazier, a kind and soft-spoken woman who provided calm where their mother often brought chaos. But as the twins grew older, Nikki wanted them back under her roof. She believed it was time they faced responsibility and lived by her rules. The court agreed, ordering the girls to move back in with Nikki in January 2010. To outsiders, it sounded like a simple family reconciliation. In reality, it was a ticking bomb. Just a week after the move, on January 13th, police received a frantic 911 call. Two teenage girls sobbed into the phone, claiming they'd come home from school to find their mother dead. The dispatcher could barely make sense of the hysteria. When officers arrived, the scene was horrific. Blood covered the bathroom floor, smeared on walls and doors. Nikki had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest, neck, and back. There were defensive wounds on her hands, a sign she had fought for her life. The twins told investigators they had gone to school that morning, returned home, and found their mother's body. They were distraught, shaking, and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. But even from the start, detectives noticed something strange. Their stories didn't quite match. The details kept changing. Their emotions seemed rehearsed, exaggerated, and beneath the sobbing, police could sense something else. Fear. As investigators dug deeper, cracks in the twins' story widened. Surveillance cameras from their school revealed they had arrived late that morning, not long after the estimated time of the murder. They had visible scratches on their hands and arms, which they blamed on a fight at school. When detectives examined the wounds, they noticed something telling. They looked fresh. Over the following months, detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle. They found that the girls' relationship with their mother had grown increasingly violent. Police reports showed prior altercations. In one instance, the twins had even run away, claiming Nikki had hit them. But the evidence suggested the girls were often the aggressors. Their resentment had been brewing for years, fueled by teenage rebellion and a toxic cycle of control and defiance. As one investigator later put it, this was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was years of anger that finally exploded. But despite suspicion, there was no immediate arrest. The girls were placed back with their great-grandmother, and life went on, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, forensic evidence was slowly being processed. Blood samples, fingerprints, DNA, all told a chilling story. The blood spatter in the bathroom indicated 2 attackers. The murder weapon, a knife from Nikki's own kitchen, bore traces of both the mother's and the daughter's DNA. By 2010's end, detectives had enough to confront the twins. After months of interviews, the facade began to crack. In early 2011, Jasmaya broke down. She confessed that she and her sister had killed their mother, but she insisted it was self-defense. She claimed Nikki had attacked them first during a morning argument, that the fight had spiraled out of control. But the brutality of the crime told a different story. According to their own admissions, that morning began like so many others, with shouting. The girls had overslept and were late for school. Nikki, furious, threatened to send them back to juvenile detention, where they had spent time before for defying court orders. The argument escalated into violence. In the chaos, one of the girls grabbed a knife. What followed was a struggle that moved from the kitchen to the bathroom, where Nikki was cornered. The twins stabbed her repeatedly until she collapsed. Even after she fell, they continued, a level of rage that can only be described as primal. Afterward, the girls tried to stage the scene. They cleaned up as best they could, threw away their bloody clothes, and went to school to create an alibi. Later that day, they returned home and made the 911 call, pretending to discover the body. It was an act of shocking calculation for 2 16-year-olds. In 2014, after years of legal wrangling, both sisters pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. They each received a 30-year prison sentence. During the hearings, the courtroom fell silent as the details were recounted. The twins wept as they apologized to their family and to the memory of their mother. Carrie Neurotter, 2017-2020, Corning, New York, USA. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Corning, New York, the Neurotter family seemed like any other suburban household. But behind the walls of their modest home, a toxic storm had been building for years, one that would explode into betrayal, manipulation, and murder. When the truth finally came out in 2017, it stunned the community. 19-year-old Carrie Neurotter had helped her father kill her own mother, Michelle Neurotter, in what prosecutors called a carefully staged domestic homicide. It was a crime born not out of rage, but out of control, and a daughter's deadly obedience to a father she couldn't break away from. Michelle and Lloyd Neurotter had been divorced for several years, sharing custody of their 3 daughters. Michele, 46, was known in Corning as a loving mother and a hard worker, someone who had devoted her life to her kids. Lloyd, meanwhile, was described as manipulative, self-centered, and obsessed with maintaining control, especially over Michelle. He resented her independence, resented her happiness, and resented the custody arrangement that left him with limited influence. But Lloyd was no ordinary bitter ex. He had a plan, one that would end with Michelle dead, and his teenage daughter as both witness and accomplice. According to investigators, the psychological manipulation began months before the murder. Lloyd constantly played the victim, convincing Carrie that her mother was evil, selfish, even dangerous. He told her Michelle was trying to destroy his life, and that the only way to fix everything was to get rid of her. Carrie, bright but emotionally dependent on her father, began to believe him. In August 2017, Lloyd called Carrie with a chilling proposition. He needed her help. At first, she refused, but Lloyd persisted, using every psychological weapon he had. He told her that if she didn't help, he would kill himself. He sent messages threatening to jump off a bridge. He told her that she was the only one he could trust. Bit by bit, he wore her down. Finally, she agreed. On the night of August 27, 2017, Carrie drove her father to her mother's home in Corning. Michelle was asleep upstairs. Lloyd entered quietly while Carrie waited outside in the car, the weight of what she was enabling pressing on her. But she didn't stop him. Minutes later, Lloyd strangled Michelle to death. Then, in a final act of deceit, father and daughter staged the scene to look like suicide. Lloyd rearranged Michelle's body, left a fake note, and tampered with the evidence to suggest she had taken her own life. He even instructed Carrie to help erase traces of his presence before they drove away. For a few days it worked. Police initially suspected suicide until inconsistencies began to pile up. The angle of the marks on Michelle's neck didn't match suicide. There were signs of a struggle. And then there was Lloyd himself, whose alibi quickly fell apart. When detectives questioned Carrie, her calm demeanor raised suspicion. Under pressure, her story cracked. She eventually confessed, not just to knowing what her father had done, but to helping him carry it out. Her confession unraveled everything. The town of Corning was horrified. The idea that a young woman had helped kill her own mother, someone who had raised her, loved her, and fought for her, was almost too much to comprehend. But the deeper investigators looked, the clearer the picture became. Carrie had been emotionally trapped by her father for years. In court, prosecutors described Lloyd as a master manipulator. He was brilliant, calculating, and deeply narcissistic. He used guilt, fear, and affection as tools, twisting his daughter's sense of loyalty until she believed his twisted reality. When he was arrested, he showed no remorse. He told detectives that his daughter wanted to help and that it was her choice. But the court saw through him. In February 2018, Lloyd Neurouter pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for sparing his daughter the harshest penalties. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His demeanor during sentencing was as cold as his crime. He expressed no regret, only frustration at being caught. Carrie's fate, however, was different. At just 19, she faced charges of second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. But her cooperation, her confession, and the evidence of her father's psychological abuse convinced prosecutors to offer a plea deal. In March 2018, Carrie pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. She was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in prison, a light sentence by comparison, but one that reflected the court's understanding that she had been groomed, manipulated, and coerced into participating. During her sentencing, Carrie wept as she spoke about her mother. "I will regret what happened for the rest of my life," she said. "I wish I had been stronger." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge acknowledged that she had been under immense psychological pressure. Still, the gravity of what she'd done lingered in every corner of that room. When Carrie was released from prison in 2020, she re-entered a world that would never see her the same way. Some saw her as a victim, a girl who had been brainwashed by a narcissistic father. Others saw her as complicit, a willing participant who could have stopped the murder but chose not to. The case became the subject of national attention, not just because of its brutality, but because of what it revealed about psychological control within families. Experts described Lloyd's behavior as textbook coercive manipulation, the kind of mental entrapment that can distort reality and erode free will. Carrie, they argued, wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but a broken young woman trying to please a man who had spent her entire life shaping her mind. In later interviews, law enforcement officials said it was one of the most tragic cases they had ever seen. "You had a father who used his own daughter as a weapon," one detective said. "He didn't just kill Michelle, he destroyed his daughter's life too." Today, the story of Carrie and Lloyd Neurouter stands as a haunting example of how manipulation can blur the line between victim and perpetrator. It challenges the way society views accountability, especially when control and abuse take root over years. In the end, justice came in two forms: life without parole for a man who orchestrated a murder, and a short prison term for a daughter who lost both her parents in one night, one to death and the other to the darkness of his own mind. The case left a lasting scar on the small town of Corning, a mother buried, a father behind bars forever, and a daughter forever marked by a crime that was both hers and not hers. Carrie's story isn't one of evil. It's one of tragedy, manipulation, and the devastating power one person can have over another when love turns into control. In the eyes of the law, she served her time, but in the court of conscience, her sentence will last a lifetime. Sarah Grace Patrick, 2025, Atlanta, Georgia, USA. In February 2025, a quiet Georgia morning broke into tragedy that seemed too dark to be real. In a tidy home outside Atlanta, two beloved members of the Brock family, Kristen, 41, and her husband James, 45, were found dead in their bedroom. Both had been shot in the head. There was no sign of forced entry, no robbery, no struggle. The killer hadn't come from outside. The killer, investigators would soon believe, came from within the home. At the center of it all stood 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick, Kristen's daughter from a previous marriage. Just hours earlier, she had placed the 911 call reporting that her parents were dead, telling dispatchers she and her 6-year-old sister had discovered them. Her voice trembled with apparent horror, but as investigators would soon learn, appearances can lie. The community of Carrollton, Georgia was stunned. Kristen was known as kind, energetic, and deeply devoted to her daughters. James, a mechanic with a sharp wit, adored his stepchildren. To friends and neighbors, they were the model of a blended family. But behind closed doors, tensions simmered. In the weeks before the murders, Sarah Grace's behavior had changed. She was distant, sometimes defiant. At school, she confided in classmates about clashes with her mother, arguments over curfews, phones, grades, and boys. Typical teenage struggles, people thought. Nothing that could ever hint at murder. Yet those close to her later recalled moments that, in hindsight, felt chilling. A coldness, an indifference, a fascination with crime stories online. The night of the killings, neighbors reported nothing unusual. Around 1 a.m., one faint sound, a thump, then silence. By dawn, both Kristen and James were dead. They'd been shot at close range as they slept. Their youngest daughter, just 6 years old, wandered the house, searching for her mother, before finding the unimaginable. Police arrived to a horrifying scene. Blood spattered across the bed and walls, drawers left open but untouched. It was staged to look like a burglary, yet nothing of value was missing. That detail changed everything. Whoever did this wasn't after money. They were after someone. investigators began examining phone records, surveillance footage, and digital activity from the family's devices. What they uncovered painted a deeply unsettling picture of Sarah Grace's life in the months leading up to the crime. On social media, she'd posted videos mourning her parents, long before she was ever charged. In one TikTok post, she wrote, "They don't know it, but a year from now, me and my little sister will find them gone." At the time, it looked like a poetic expression of teenage anxiety. Later, it read like a prophecy. Detectives interviewed Sarah Grace repeatedly. Each time, her story changed. Small details first, then larger ones. She said she'd been asleep when the shots were fired. Then she said she'd heard noises. Finally, she claimed she'd walked into the room after it was over. Her timeline didn't match the evidence. Forensic analysis showed gunshot residue on her clothing. Ballistics confirmed the weapon used belonged to James, a handgun kept locked in a bedside safe. The safe showed no signs of forced entry. When police confronted her, she broke down, but her tears seemed rehearsed. Over the following months, investigators pieced together an image not of spontaneous rage, but of deliberate planning. Her phone revealed searches like "how to get gunpowder off hands" and "how to stage a home invasion." Even more disturbing were messages to friends, written days before the murder, expressing hatred toward her mother and claiming that life would be easier once she was gone. The public couldn't fathom it. How could a teenager, barely 17, commit such a calculated act? Psychologists who studied the case described it as a textbook example of displaced adolescent rage, the product of years of tension, possibly fueled by narcissism, emotional neglect, or a desire for control. At her parents' funeral, Sarah Grace delivered a eulogy that left many uneasy. She spoke softly, saying, "They were the best parents anyone could ask for. I'll carry them in my heart forever." Then she paused and added, almost whispering, "I'm sorry." Some thought she was apologizing for their deaths. Others thought she was apologizing for what she had done. The case grew even stranger when investigators learned that, after the murders, Sarah Grace had reached out to several online true crime influencers, asking them to cover her parents' murder and promising it would be a big story. Carly Gregg, 15, Mississippi, USA. In March 2024, in the quiet town of Lucedale, Mississippi, March 2024 brought a story that would shake even the most hardened small-town hearts. It wasn't the kind of crime you could explain away with anger or desperation. It was something colder, something that made investigators and psychologists alike pause and wonder what had gone so horribly wrong inside a 15-year-old girl named Carly Gregg. Carly was the sort of teenager who blended into the background. She wasn't a troublemaker, not exactly. Her teachers described her as quiet, smart, and a little detached. But there were cracks forming beneath that calm surface. At home, life was complicated. Her mother, Ashley Smiley, 40, worked long hours and had recently remarried, a decision that Carly never truly accepted. The new husband brought rules, expectations, and an attempt to fix a family dynamic that had long been broken. What no one realized was that resentment was already turning into something darker. On the night of the murder, the house was still. Ashley had come home late, exhausted. Carly was waiting. What happened next was chilling in its simplicity. A single shot fired at her mother, calculated, cold, and without hesitation. Ashley Smiley died instantly. There were no screams, no struggle, just the sudden and irreversible end of a life. Then came the next step in Carly's plan. With eerie calm, she picked up her phone and sent a text to her stepfather, pretending to be her mother. "Come home. Need you." When he arrived, she ambushed him, firing again. The bullet hit his shoulder, but he survived. That survival would be what ultimately unraveled her plan and exposed her complete lack of remorse. When police arrived, Carly was sitting in the living room, weapon beside her, expressionless. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. According to officers, she looked bored, as if she'd been waiting for them to arrive. One investigator later said it was the coldest look I've ever seen on a child's face. The courtroom became a stage for a psychological autopsy. How could a teenager execute such an act with precision and calm? Prosecutors painted her as a manipulative, emotionally detached young woman who had plotted the murder to gain control. Someone who viewed her mother and stepfather as obstacles, not family. The defense tried to argue mental instability, claiming Carly suffered from severe depression and possible dissociation. But when the jury watched the footage of her interrogation, laughing, rolling her eyes, even mocking her own attorneys, sympathy evaporated. There was something deeply unsettling about the way she behaved. Court transcripts revealed moments where she seemed to treat the entire process like a joke. When asked by investigators if she regretted it, she allegedly replied, "What's the point? She's gone." No tears, no apologies, no trace of remorse. It wasn't just her crime that terrified people. It was her emotional emptiness. Psychologists brought in to evaluate her described traits consistent with early psychopathy. Lack of empathy, shallow affect, and a disturbing ability to manipulate. She wasn't delusional, they said. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she enjoyed the control it gave her. Her behavior in court confirmed it. Cold stares at the jury, whispered comments to her attorneys, and occasional inappropriate laughter. At one point, she even smirked as her stepfather testified about the night she tried to kill him. The trial was swift, but unforgettable. The prosecution sought life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing the deliberate nature of the act and her complete lack of remorse. The judge agreed. When the sentence was read, Carly didn't flinch. She just looked straight ahead, her face a blank canvas. In the days that followed, Mississippi media dissected every angle. Was Carly a monster? A product of neglect? A child who simply lost her moral compass? Neighbors spoke of a girl who rarely smiled, who kept to herself, who seemed off in a way that's hard to describe. One former friend said, it was like she could copy emotions, but never really feel them. Her social media accounts revealed little. No warnings, no violent outbursts, no manifesto of rage. Just typical teenage snapshots. A mirror selfie here, a random meme there. The ordinariness made the crime feel even more surreal. How could someone so young, so apparently normal, harbor such darkness? Investigators would later reveal that Carly had stolen the gun weeks before, rehearsed her plan, and even timed her stepfather's arrival to ensure he'd walk into the ambush. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated, methodical, and disturbingly mature. The courtroom psychologist summed it up best. Carly Gregg doesn't experience guilt or empathy in a conventional way. Her reactions are intellectual, not emotional. She understands what she did was wrong, but she doesn't feel that it was wrong. That distinction struck fear in everyone listening. Even now, from her cell, Carly remains a mystery. According to prison staff, she rarely speaks, doesn't show emotion, and spends hours writing in notebooks she refuses to share. Some say she smiles when people talk about her case, as if being remembered, even as a killer, gives her a strange sense of satisfaction. Her surviving stepfather, still bearing the physical and emotional scars, said during sentencing, "I don't know if she ever loved her mother. I think she loved control." Those words echo the horror of what happened in that quiet Mississippi home. A story not of sudden rage, but of chilling calculation. What makes Carly's case so haunting isn't just the brutality. It's the psychological void behind it. At 15, she showed the emotional flatness of someone far older, far more damaged. She didn't kill in a fit of anger. She killed because she wanted to, and she didn't care about the consequences. The judge, a veteran of the bench, said during sentencing, "It is rare and profoundly disturbing to see such absence of humanity in someone so young. This court can only hope that time and reflection might one day awaken something inside her." But as Carly was led away, she turned to the courtroom, smiled faintly, and said nothing. In a world full of violent crimes, the murder of Ashley Smiley stands out, not for its spectacle, but for its quiet horror. It forces us to confront a question we'd rather avoid. Can evil exist in a child, fully formed, waiting only for the right moment to surface? Carly Gregg's life sentence ensures she will never walk free again. But in the minds of those who witnessed her trial, the unease lingers. Because what happened in that Mississippi home wasn't just murder. It was the unsettling glimpse into a mind that felt nothing at all. United Kingdom, Virginia McCullough. In the quiet suburb of Great Baddow, Essex, a chilling secret hid in plain sight for years. The brick house on Pump Hill belonged to retired university lecturer John McCullough and his wife Lois. Both were respected in their community, seen as loving, responsible, and stable. But behind those walls, their youngest daughter, Virginia McCullough, was plotting a betrayal so deep it would shake the foundations of trust and family alike. The murders took place in the summer of 2019. John, 70, was slowly poisoned by Virginia. She crushed his prescription medication and mixed it into his drink, gradually weakening him until he died. The next day, she turned her attention to Lois, 71. In a brutal and personal act, she beat her mother with a hammer and stabbed her multiple times with a kitchen knife she had prepared for the purpose. Within a span of 2 days, she had committed both murders with precision, cruelty, and astonishing composure. What followed is what made this case truly horrifying. For nearly 4 years, Virginia continued living in the same house with the bodies of her parents. She built a makeshift tomb for her father, a rectangular structure of breeze blocks covered with blankets and paintings in his bedroom. Her mother's body was wrapped in a sleeping bag and hidden in a wardrobe on the top floor. Meanwhile, she spun a web of lies, telling doctors, friends, and distant family members that her parents were unwell, traveling, or away on long trips. She controlled visitors, kept curtains drawn, and maintained the appearance of normalcy throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, she siphoned money from their pensions and ran up large debts on their credit cards, all while living alongside the remains of the people who raised her. In September 2023, the charade began to unravel. A GP became concerned when John missed appointments and failed to collect his medication. After a safeguarding referral, police entered the home and discovered the remains. Virginia, confronted, confessed immediately. She told officers the bodies were upstairs, under blankets. In her calm and almost matter-of-fact admission, she said that she had known the truth would eventually be discovered, and that it was proper she face punishment. Her composure sent chills through investigators. She was not panicking, not pleading, not remorseful in a conventional sense. Her motivations were complex and chilling. Virginia had long behaved as though she were the adult in the house, manipulating her parents, draining their finances, and establishing control over family routines. Prosecutors described her as an intelligent manipulator who had carefully planned the murders over months. Her father's death by poisoning delayed discovery, while her mother's murder was swift and violent. Psychological experts who examined her behavior noted a pattern consistent with a lack of empathy and a remarkable capacity for long-term deception. She maintained routines, avoided scrutiny, and managed to prevent the detection of her crimes for years. At the sentencing hearing at Chelmsford Crown Court, the full horror was laid bare. The judge described Virginia's actions as a gross violation of the trust that exists between parent and child. The concealment of the bodies, the financial exploitation, and the manipulation of family members were all aggravating factors. Her parents had been vulnerable, not only because of age, but because they trusted their own daughter implicitly, a trust she weaponized with deadly effect. Virginia had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in a previous hearing. At sentencing, she received a life sentence with a minimum term of 36 years before eligibility for parole. Given her age at the time of the crimes and the minimum term, the sentence may effectively mean she will never be released. The court recognized the premeditation, manipulation, and coldness of her actions, and the sentence reflected the severity of the betrayal, as well as the cruelty involved in living with the victims' bodies for years. The case is haunting, not just for the murders themselves, but for the way the killer lived among the victims, maintaining a facade of normalcy while deceiving the world.
Siblings and extended family were left grappling with the question of how such horrors could occur undetected for so long. Neighbors recalled a house with drawn curtains, few signs of life, and a quiet sense of unease, though none could have imagined the truth within. From a psychological perspective, Virginia's case challenges our understanding of manipulation, entitlement, and family dynamics. She demonstrated the capacity to control, deceive, and exploit, while also showing a cold detachment that allowed her to continue her daily life among the very people she had killed. Financial gain played a role, as she used her parents' pensions and credit to fund herself. But it was the combination of calculated cruelty and prolonged deception that made her crimes exceptional. The court heard testimony about her long-term planning, the way she prevented discovery, and her ability to lie convincingly to those around her. Her intelligence and meticulousness allowed her to maintain this macabre secret for nearly 4 years. Psychologists noted that her capacity for duplicity and emotionless execution was highly unusual, particularly in a domestic context where familial bonds are typically strong. Virginia's actions left lasting scars on the community. Her parents' deaths were a tragedy of betrayal, compounded by years of deception. Family members struggled with grief, disbelief, and the disturbing knowledge that their trust had been weaponized. The legal system delivered justice in the form of a life sentence, but the psychological and emotional impact of her actions will endure far beyond her prison term. This story serves as a stark reminder that evil can be patient and hidden, operating behind the veneer of normalcy and familial trust. It shows the devastating consequences of manipulation the dangers of unchecked ambition and entitlement, and the horrifying reality that those closest to us can sometimes become our worst threat. Virginia McCullough's life sentence marks the end of one chapter, but the legacy of her crimes, fear, grief, and shock will linger indefinitely in the lives of those affected. In the end, the McCullough case is not just about murder. It is about the corruption of trust, the perversion of familial bonds, and the terrifying possibility that calculated cruelty can exist in the most unsuspecting places. 2019, New York, USA. Tanya Campbell. It was a gray June afternoon in 2019 when a call came into the Suffolk County Police Department on Long Island, New York. A desperate mother threatening to take her own life and those of her 2-year-old twin daughters. The voice on the phone was trembling, frantic. The caller was 28-year-old Tanya Campbell. Within hours, that call would lead to one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing crime scenes the county had ever witnessed. A young mother, broken by mental illness, driving aimlessly through the Hamptons with the lifeless bodies of her children in the back seat. Tanya Campbell's story began far from that tragic road in Montauk. Born in 1991, she grew up in Long Island, raised in a close-knit family that never imagined how deep her struggles would become. Friends later described her as warm but unpredictable, a woman capable of laughter one moment and terrifying rage the next. By her late 20s, Tanya was a single mother of twin girls, Jasmine and Jada, who had just turned 2. The girls were her world, but also, according to those close to her, a heavy burden she was struggling to carry. Tanya had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder years earlier. Despite treatment, her mental health had spiraled after the twins were born. She often told friends she felt overwhelmed and alone. She was unemployed, living with her mother, and trying to raise 2 toddlers while battling severe mood swings. Her mother, Valerie, had become the anchor of the family, helping care for the twins when Tanya couldn't. But by the summer of 2019, cracks in that fragile system began to widen. On June 27th, the day of the tragedy, Valerie noticed her daughter behaving strangely. Around 2 p.m., Tanya abruptly took the family van and left home with the twins, refusing to say where she was going. A short time later, Valerie received a chilling call. Tanya told her mother that she was going to kill herself and that she couldn't leave her daughters behind. "I'm sorry," she said. "They can't live without me." Valerie's hands shook as she called 911. Police immediately issued an alert for the vehicle, a gray Chrysler minivan, and began tracking Tanya's phone. Over the next few hours, multiple law enforcement agencies joined the search. They pinged her phone to the eastern end of Long Island, near the Hamptons. Officers raced to intercept her, praying they were not too late. Meanwhile, Tanya drove along the quiet coastal roads, the twin girls strapped in their car seats behind her. Somewhere along that lonely route, authorities later concluded, near Montauk Highway, she pulled over and did the unthinkable. Using her bare hands, she suffocated both children. No one knows what went through her mind in those final moments, whether it was despair, delusion, or a belief that she was saving them from pain. But when police finally found her van in a parking area near the Montauk County Park entrance, it was already too late. Officers described a chilling calm when they approached. Tanya sat in the driver's seat, motionless. The twins were in the back, unresponsive, their faces pale and still. Paramedics rushed to perform CPR, but both children were pronounced dead at the scene. Tanya didn't resist arrest. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the officers and said, "I'm sorry." The news spread across New York like wildfire. Even in a city accustomed to tragedy, this case cut deep. The image of two toddlers, suffocated by the hands of their own mother, was almost